Well, I think the way the United States has wielded power has changed considerably since the days of the early republic. One of the biggest changes was that after World War II, once the United States had a very, very large standing military capability and a network of defense alliances, the United States came to rely much more heavily on threats of force rather than uses of military force. Threats of force to deter adversaries, to coerce compliance with certain demands that the United States might have, to try to resolve crises, to reassure allies. And one of the issues that I'm interested in is how does that shift to reliance on threats of force manifest in changes or evolution in constitutional allocation of power. So for me, one of the most interesting issues is, or one of the most problematic disconnects in the way that legal scholars view powers of war and peace and the way that they're actually exercised in practice is that lawyers and legal scholars tend to focus almost exclusively on actual uses of force, actual engagements with the enemy. These are events that are obviously very politically salient. These are events that often generate formal legal determinations, for example, by the executive branch or by other branches of government, and so they make for easy study and obvious study by legal analysts, by legal scholars. My concern is that the actual decision to use force, to go to war, to launch military strikes, that's a decision that actually comes quite late in the decision tree. And there are many decisions before that leading up. For example, decisions to threaten force is one that I'm especially interested in, where the president may be quite unconstrained legally, politically. Now, one of the issues that I want to explore and that I talk about in my work is what kinds of political checks, even if not formal legal checks, presidents face in wielding threats of force. But I think this is a very important issue for constitutional scholars, for legal scholars who are interested in how, in practice, does the allocation of powers of war and peace actually affect the practice of American foreign policy. Well, it remains to be seen what the long-term effects of this will be. Certainly for many decades, it's been common practice for the president to use limited force without obtaining prior congressional authorization or even without going back to Congress after the fact to seek congressional approval. The president in this case, in the Syria case, made very clear that he believes that he has the constitutional authority to take this action, but he thought that as a matter of good policy, he would go to Congress. Now, we don't really know what the outcome of the Syria crisis will be. It does appear that this was a risky gamble for him. Certainly the indications were that at the very least, it was going to be a very, very difficult road to get that congressional authorization, and quite possible that Congress would have rebuffed him. For threats of force to work effectively, credibility is very important. And I think one issue that ought to be of interest to both legal scholars and scholars of other disciplines, political scientists, historians, and so on, is the degree to which external audiences, other states, other non-state groups, our allies, our adversaries, to what degree are they paying attention to the allocation of legal powers within the American system? When President Obama says that he believes that he ought to go to Congress for authorization, how is that signal read abroad? To what degree does that perhaps undermine the credibility of U.S. threats, or especially in the long term, might such a move enhance the credibility of U.S. threats, enhance the perception of American resolve once the president does actually issue a threat or draw a red line?